Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. The topic of a secret space program has always been on my mind, and actually last summer there was a big conference for the secret space program, and that got me really interested and made me dive headfirst into the topic. And since then I have a lecture out there talking about the secret weapons of Antichrist, looking at the secret space program, seeing how funds in America or post-World War II could even, help operate something like a secret space program. Because obviously if it's going on, the money has to come from somewhere. And some of the things that were uncovered by alternative researchers and revisionist historians seem to suggest that there was a large sum of money that came into the possession of the United States and global institutions post-World War II. But in any case, the suspicion has always been there, and it's always been sort of a big conspiracy topic, to the point where I actually even wrote a book about it. It's unedited, unpublished, but it's pretty much complete, and I obviously looked at it from a biblical perspective, which is different from, a lot of the research out there. And that may be a turnoff for some people, but for me, I'm always looking through things through a biblical prophetic lens. So I wanted to add that spin to it and see how a space war or a secret space program may be part of the unfolding of biblical prophecy. And one of the things that I speculated was that the Antichrist would have control of certain space weapons. And the basic idea comes from this notion that the Antichrist, or the beast, or the first beast found in Revelation 13, is going to be extremely powerful. And if you look at Revelation 13, verse 4, it says, "And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it?'" And if you look at the KJV, it's, "Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" And this extra ability for war making that this beast will have, I thought would include the complete control of space weaponry. Now, space weapons has always been sort of it's not really happening out there. It's just a conspiracy. You guys are all crazy for thinking that there's offensive weapons out there. But plenty of alternative researchers have suggested that there are space weapons out there. And the technology's there. I've talked about it in a recent video. But it seems that mainstream media outlets are confirming this idea that there is an actual secret space program. Not only that, but there are 3 nations that pretty much control the dealings in space. Scientific American came out with an article on August 10th, 2015. "War in space may be closer than ever. China, Russia, and US are developing and testing controversial new capabilities to wage war in space despite their denial of such work." What does that sound like? A secret space program. And if you read through this article, it's quite remarkable, some of the things that they suggest. In my opinion, it's a pretty groundbreaking article because they sort of admit that there is a secret space program and offensive weapons being tested in space. Let me just read this quote here. "The prospect of war in space is not new." And they talk about the United Nations Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which said that there would be no weapons of mass destruction. That was the language they used in outer space. But it seems like a lot of space programs, at least the United States, got around that because they made weapons of pinpoint destruction, not mass destruction like nuclear warheads, but things like Project Thor, the Rods of God, these projectile and energy weapons, which would be labeled as weapons of, again, pinpoint destruction. And they go through here and they talk about China, how they launched a missile in 2007 that destroyed one of its own weather satellites in low Earth orbit. And that actually caused great concern for the US because they're saying, wait, what are you guys doing? And, it talks about China. They also have energy weapons, kinetic weapons, ground-based anti-satellite kinetic weapons. And it's pointed out into space and they've tested things. They say it's for peace and security and whatnot, but it could easily be turned around. That was a wake-up call, says Brian Whedon, a security analyst and former Air Force officer who studied and helped publicize the Chinese test. The U.S., this is Brian Whedon talking now, the U.S. came to grips decades ago with the fact that its lower orbit satellites could easily be shot down, Whedon said. Going nearly to geosynchronous made people realize that, holy cow, someone might actually try to go after the stuff we have up there. It was no coincidence that shortly after the May 2013 test, the U.S. declassified details of its secret Geosynchronous Space Situational Awareness Program, GSSAP, a planned set of 4 satellites capable of monitoring the Earth's high orbits and even rendezvous with other satellites to inspect them up close. The first 2 GSSAP spacecraft launched into orbit in July 2014. Quote, "This used to be a black program, something that didn't officially exist," Whedon said. "It was declassified to basically send a message saying, hey, if you're doing something funky in and around the geosynchronous belt, we're going to see it. An interloper into geosynchronous orbit need not be an explosive-tipped missile to be a security risk. Even sliding up to an adversary's strategic satellite is considered a threat, which is one reason that potential U.S. adversaries might be alarmed by the rendezvous capabilities of GSSAP and of the U.S. Air Force's highly maneuverable X-37B robotic space planes." And we talked about the X-37B last year and how their payloads were classified. And so, again, this is all verifying the things that have been speculated by conspiracy theorists for a long time, and it's becoming public now. There's a section here, "Is war in space inevitable?" And let me read a couple lines from this. "Meanwhile, shifts in U.S. policy are giving China and Russia more reasons for further suspicion. Congress has been pressing the U.S. national security community to turn its attention to the role of offensive rather than defensive capabilities, even dictating that most of the fiscal year 2015 funding for the Pentagon's space security and defense program go towards, quote, development of offensive space control and active defense strategies and capabilities, end quote. Now, the SDI program, the Strategic Defense Initiative that was implemented in 1983 or 84, I think, by Reagan, was made for ground and space-based defense mechanisms, to track and monitor space to see if there's any, missiles launched from, the USSR or whatever. That stuff was already developed in the 80s. But of course, I think even then they were putting offensive weapons up there. But let me continue reading this paragraph. "Offensive space control is a clear reference to weapons. Active defense is much more nebulous and refers to undefined offensive countermeasures that could be taken against an attack, further widening the routes by which space might soon become weaponized. If an imminent threat is perceived, a satellite or its operators might preemptively attack via dazzling lasers, jamming microwaves, kinetic bombardment, or any other number of possible methods." So again, Scientific American is not going to say there has been a secret space program for 50 years or whatever, but it's getting to the point where some things just can't stay classified. And so I think that's what we're seeing. Now, there was another article by Reuters, same date, August 10th, 2015. "When it comes to war in space, U.S. has the edge." And this article pretty much talks about how the U.S., China, and Russia are basically deploying already sophisticated weaponry in space, and that the U.S. actually has control of the majority of space right now, but that, that could be threatened. I'm going to briefly just interject and kind of get to the point here. I'll leave links to these 2 articles and a couple more articles that talk about space weapons and stuff like that. But I do want to throw something out there. Now, it's interesting that the US, China, and Russia are the 3 major powers that have some sort of stock in space. Now, a couple things to consider with these space-based weapons that are probably already out there. Isn't it interesting that when you look at something like ISIS, for example, and the terrorist organizations in the Middle East and all this stuff, that perhaps, these power nations don't really see them as much of a threat as they once did? Because if they wanted to, they can take a space-based weapon and they can literally shoot energy beams or lasers or whatever from space and effectively wipe out large masses of land, big groups of people. I mean, they could do this, which verifies to me that the only reason why something like ISIS even exists, other than the fact that it was a creation of the CIA, is that it's for fear-mongering and propaganda purposes to keep certain things under control by the globalist elite. And so that's pretty obvious. But think about this. What if they were already using these weapons, especially recently with the heat waves that we've been seeing in Iran around this whole nuclear deal? An article in Time magazine and, weather.com and stuff like that reported that in the Persian Gulf, the heat index reached an astonishing 164 degrees on Friday, which was about 2 weeks ago. And the record is a 178 degrees that was recorded in Saudi Arabia in 2003. Now, Okay, 2003, we're already talking, they probably had these space weapons. Is it possible? I'm not saying that I know for sure, I'm just throwing it out there. Is it possible that these space-based weapons that are controlled maybe by the US and Russia and China, perhaps another global elite or a breakaway civilization that Richard Dolan has talked about, is it possible that they have certain control over these weapons, and that now that, this Iran deal is happening and people are unhappy, that they're using these weapons to effectively burn up Iran? I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's way too conspiratorial, but I wouldn't be surprised. Also, crop circles. Crop circles has been one of those things that it has been tied to the extraterrestrial alien conversation. But is it possible that crop circles itself are certain energy weapons being used from space? It's quite possible. The other thing to consider also is the connection to the occult. The entire rocket program, NASA, everything was started with satanic underpinnings. Jack Parsons being someone who was a big fan of Aleister Crowley, doing Babylon Working in the 1940s. I mean, it all ties back to satanic rituals. And so obviously the whole entire space program itself had humble satanic beginnings, if you will. And so getting to the point here of looking at it from a biblical perspective. Now, I have the lecture, I'll leave a link to it, Secret Weapons of Antichrist. I didn't get too far into the weapons itself because I wanted to establish a foundation with the money that's out there to support this in the form of riches that were gained post-World War II. And there's a huge history there. It's a huge conspiracy topic. And I also have a conversation about the secret space program that I had with Dan Duval. I have that in the description section as well if you want to check that out. I think it's like a 2.5 hour or 3 hour conversation or something. And, again, there have been plenty of people that have talked about this issue, and but no one really from the biblical perspective. And that's really what I was trying to provide. And, I gave you one verse earlier, but there are a few others. For example, in the book of Obadiah, there's one chapter here. And when you go to verse 3 and verse 4, there's something very interesting. Verse 3, the pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock in your lofty dwellings, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. And of course, this is talking about the nation of Edom. Edom will be humbled. And, it's kind of a short prophecy to Obadiah, but at the same time, it is prophetic. And so perhaps there is something more to it than the immediate context that it was given to Obadiah at that point in time. And of course, in my view, with the supernatural abilities of God, God's prophecies can speak to multiple generations and have gems of truth that scatter throughout. And then Jeremiah 51:53 is another very interesting passage. Though Babylon should mount up to heaven, and though she should fortify her strong height, yet destroyers would come from me against her, declares the Lord. So again, of course, this is sort of rhetoric concerning Babylon, but at the same time, ascending to heaven and fortifying their strong height, fortifying their stronghold. This is very interesting because it's talking about the heavens, it's talking about forts out in heaven, and, it just sounds very much like what we're starting to see with the space weapons. And of course, in the Bible, there are 3 different heavens. There's the immediate atmosphere, there's outer space, and then there's heaven as in God's throne room. So that's something to consider as well. And I don't want to go through a whole breakdown here, but these passages that have been there for such a long time could possibly be talking about these space wars that are about to happen, and perhaps Russia, US, China has something to do with the 3 nations, the 3 beasts that will eventually become a conglomerate beast, the 4th beast, because I think that's all contemporary. At the same time, we have to consider in Rome and the papacy and the Vatican and stuff like that, they also have stock in space. I don't know if they have satellites, but I'm sure it's tied with the United States, at least their space program. I'm sure there is some sort of connection there that is yet to be fully explored and uncovered. But these are things that are starting to happen, and the point is that the public now is privy to these seeds of truth that war in space may be closer than ever. Reuters reporting when it comes to war in space, US has the edge. All these ideas are being planted And another thing to consider, this whole idea of transhumanism and robots and the singularity and all this stuff, it could work both ways. If an artificially intelligent AI sentient robot machine, came online, effectively, this thing would have control of all the communication systems and the satellites that are out in space. And that would yield to a very, very powerful, pretty much unstoppable eye in the sky, so to speak, that can shoot lasers at you. So, I mean, quite literally, this is scarier than you think. And you imagine, if they have robots or, transhumanists on the ground, that they would be also controlled from these satellites. So again, this end times military that is going to be run by the Antichrist will be very, very powerful. And I would not be surprised if this beast Antichrist will harness all the space weapons. The other possibility also to work into this, and again, I'm throwing all this out there, kind of a smorgasbord, shooting from the hip type thing. It's kind of unorganized. I apologize, but I just kind of wanted to rant about it. The extraterrestrial presence has something to do with it. Revelation 13 talks about the dragon and how the dragon gave the beast his power and throne and great authority, and that perhaps this dragon is the alleged, quote unquote, extraterrestrial disclosure event or whatever it is, because then the technologies that would open up from this dragon that gives this authority to the beast, it could be some sort of technology or some sort of weaponry, something to allow this beast to basically become unstoppable and a war machine. And so, again, these are all things that are, sort of in the mode of possibilities right now. But the main point is that the Bible is not silent on these issues. You might say, oh, you're stretching the Bible to make it mean what it's not. But again, I have a view that God's word is eternal and it addresses events both in the time that it was written, but also especially in prophetic passages, things of the future in ways that cannot be something that was just conjured up in the mind of man. So those are things to consider. And I just want to announce also at the end of this, let me just finish up here by saying that the book I have, The Cosmic Endgame, that I've been, working on, but, obviously it's been sort of shelved because of everything else going on. Again, the unedited version is done. Okay. And I actually got the first chapter edited, and there's just a lot of things that need to be done before it becomes public. However, I do plan to make some of the information there into a documentary film, and I want to make a secret space program documentary. Right now, I'm in the early stages of trying to contact a few people that might be able to do interviews and stuff like that for the film, and I'm hoping to have it done before the end of the year. But that's something that's on my heart because, I wrote a whole book about it, but it's not going to be done or ready or anything like that. So might as well make a movie because, YouTube and stuff. So look out for that. It's a big topic. I'm never going to be able to cover everything in it in one documentary, but I think it's something that should be introduced to the church. It has huge tie-ins with, obviously, the Vatican and what they're doing. It has huge tie-ins with transhumanism and that whole topic. And so it's another thread in the ever-expanding web of lies. So hope you guys have an awesome day. Check out those articles. Check out some of those videos that I'll link to. And let me know what you think. God bless.